before we start, I'm just gonna do a couple of small little notes to know. If you have problem hearing anybody, or if you have problem seeing the presentation, the best way to fix this is always to leave the presentation and then come back. This should fix most issues. So if you can't hear Anne, or you can't hear me, or see the slides, this is the best way to fix it. And at the end of the presentation, we will have a Q&A. If you have any questions during the presentation, there is a questions tab on the right. You can leave your questions there, and then I will make sure that they're ready, and then I will ask them to Anne at the end of the presentation. But for now, Anne, I'm going to give it over to you.
Thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to join you today. There's so much we need to do in the privacy front. It's just growing every day. So what I'm going to do is walk you first through the essentials of privacy, and then privacy by design, and hopefully what we can do about it. So I'm going to try to do all of that, and Stefan is kindly going to advance my screens. So let's start with the next screen, please. And then the next screen, that's who I am, you know who I am. And that's why my title is The Time to Get Serious About Privacy is right now, because surveillance is mounting so steadily. And I just fear where it may take us. Next slide, please. I always want to start every talk by dispelling the myths about privacy, because there are so many. In the next slide, I talk about the most prevalent myth. Privacy does not equal secrecy. People say, well, if you have nothing to hide, what's the problem? There's no problem. Yes, there is. That's not what freedom is about. Freedom is about you, the individual, the data subject, making decisions relating to your personal information, relating to its use and disclosure. You have to be the one to decide, not someone else, not the state, not someone else on your behalf. In the next slide, I talk about what privacy is really about. Privacy equals control. It's all about personal control on the part of the data subject. And in the next slide, I expand upon this, what that means in terms of personal control. User control is absolutely critical. Without the user being in charge of the use and disclosure of his or her personal information, we're not going to have any privacy. And I always say, look, privacy is not a religion. If you want to give away your personal information, be my guest, as long as you make the decision to do so. Freedom of choice is absolutely critical. And the Germans have a wonderful term for this called informational self-determination, that it should be the individual who determines the fate of his or her personal information. I love that term. I thank Germany for coming up with that, because it is absolutely essential. In the next slide, I also like to talk about privacy and forming the foundation of our freedom. You cannot have free and open societies without a solid foundation of privacy. It is a necessary condition for societal prosperity and well-being. And I talk about this, people always say, oh, privacy hinders innovation. It does the exact opposite. It breeds innovation. It's absolutely essential for creativity. I would like to give the example of Steve Jobs, who, privacy was so important to him, because you love to have blue sky thinking, crazy ideas that you throw out. Some of them you keep, some of them you don't. And he used to buy a new white Mercedes every 6 months, minus a day. And then he took the car into the dealership and buy another one, and he kept doing this 6 months less a day. Why? Because at that time in California, which is where he lived, you didn't have to get a license number on your car after you bought a new car for 6 months. You had 6 months to do it. So he didn't want to be tracked. He didn't want a license plate number on his car. So he always took it in and then got another one. Unfortunately, after he died, they changed the law. So you have to get a license plate right away. But creativity breeds innovation, and privacy breeds both. The opposite of that is surveillance. Surveillance is the antithesis of privacy. usurps your cognitive bandwidth, meaning, sorry, psychologists like talk in terms of cognition. It needs to go inward because you're always looking over your shoulder. Who's listening? Who's watching? Surveillance is the exact opposite of privacy. And there are many reasons why we don't want surveillance, but that is one. In the next slide, please, we have privacy by design, which is what I like to talk about. The decade of privacy by design, as I notice in the next slide, we talk about the decade of privacy by design. Because first of all, I created privacy by design when I was Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, Canada, for 3 terms. But when I first started, I was concerned that regulatory compliance, which is always after the fact, is too little too late. It kicks in once the privacy harms have taken place and the data breaches has happened. I wanted to prevent the privacy harms from arising. I wanted a model of prevention, much like a medical model of prevention, that you could prevent the privacy harms and enjoy privacy. And in order to do that, privacy has to be proactively embedded into the design of our operations. Could I have the next slide, please? Actually, we'll do the next 2 slides will be very welcome. Having a bit of a problem here. I don't know if Stefan can hear me, because I don't know how to advance the slides without you. Oh my. Stefan, are you there?
Yes, sorry. Which slide do you need?
Yeah, 2 slides, please. Next slide and then the one after.
This one?
It's not moving on mine.
Oh, is it not moving on yours? Okay, let me. Does this work?
No, that's way too far down. I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on. Go back, 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 back. Okay, yes. Now, after this, keep going. Keep going. And what after this? Okay. Let me start with adoption of privacy by design as an international standard. In 2010, so privacy commissioners all around the world, we get together for a privacy conference, an annual international conference once a year. Usually it's in Europe. In 2010, it was in Jerusalem. And at the end of the conference, commissioners are allowed to advance resolutions that they want all the commissioners to vote on. And that year, I advanced the resolution that privacy by design should complement regulatory compliance, privacy laws, which are always after the fact. I wanted something proactively to be introduced. And to my delight, it was unanimously passed. Amazing. It was unanimously passed as an international standard. And the reason I was surprised is because most commissioners are what I call lawyers, brilliant lawyers that love to apply Section 23, sub 2, part A, and apply it to the fact situation and get a wonderful outcome. And that's very important. But I was surprised that they would support a proactive measure of prevention that you could, bake into the code, into your design, into your data architecture. And I went around thanking all of them afterwards. And then after speaking to them, I understood why they all voted in favor of this. In the next slide, please. What they said to me was, look, we're only reaching the tip of the iceberg through privacy laws, which are after the fact. We need to change the model. Most privacy breaches are still remaining undetected, unknown, unchallenged. That's the base of the iceberg. And so they said, we have to, absolutely must, do something proactively to complement regulatory compliance. And that's why we all supported privacy by design, because regulatory compliance alone is no longer sustainable. It's the sole model of ensuring the future of privacy. So I was delighted, of course, to hear this. In the next slide, I'm also delighted to be able to report that privacy by design the 7 foundational principles, which I'll expand upon shortly. It's been translated into 40 languages, 40, all around the world it's followed. You know, not a week goes by and I don't hear from some jurisdiction what they're doing and how it's going, and it's just delightful. Now, next slide, please. I'll tell you the 2 essentials to privacy by design. And there are 2. I've already talked about the first one. You have to be proactive in an effort to prevent the privacy harms from rising. But the second one is just as important: banish zero-sum models. By that I mean, zero-sum means you can only have a positive gain in one area, security, always to the detriment of the other area, privacy, so that two total to a sum of 0. It was no privacy that gained over the other interests, and nor am I suggesting it should be, but I sure as heck wasn't going to have it lose out every time to all the other interests. No, we have to get rid of this dated win-lose model. In the next slide, please. That's what I'm pushing for. We have to get rid of the zero-sum mindset of either or, win-lose. It's so yesterday. We don't need this. In the next slide, please. I talk about how important it is to go to what's called a positive sum model, 2 positive gains at the same time. A win-win, not a win-lose. It's as simple and as difficult as changing the paradigm from a zero-sum to a positive sum model, creating a win-win scenario, not an either-or win-lose, involving unnecessary trade-offs and false dichotomies. One of the brilliant cryptographers, Bert Schneier, he's the one who said to me, Anne, this zero sum involves these unnecessary trade-offs and false dichotomies. It's crazy, you don't need that. And you know, I love that, but I remember also thinking that when I was in graduate school, Anatole Rappaport, who was the creator of game theory, zero sum, positive sum, he was at the University of Toronto where I did my graduate work, and I just fawned over him, and I always used to follow him around. And I remember asking him, I said, Professor Rappaport, why do people embrace the zero-sum model? I'm the eternal optimist. I would much rather have win-win, positive sum. And he said, Anne, it's simple. Zero-sum is the lazy man's way out. It's much easier just to have a positive gain in one area than work to develop it in 2 areas. But he said the returns are far greater when both areas win. So that's what I'm telling you. Let's do win-win all the way. Now, in the next slide, you'll see that I'm talking about the 7 foundational principles to privacy by design. I'm going to go through them very quickly. I've already covered a number of them. You have to be proactive, not reactive, in an effort to prevent the privacy harms from arising. In the moment on number 2, privacy privacy as the default setting. This is a game changer because what it says to customers, you don't have to ask for privacy. You don't have to go through all the terms of service and all the legalese in the privacy policy to find the opt-out box that says do not use my personal information for any other purpose other than the primary purpose of the data collection. You know, people don't do that anymore. It just takes too long. It takes hours to do that. But it doesn't mean people don't care about privacy. Concern for privacy is at an all-time high. Since the last 2 years, concern for privacy has been at the 90 percentile. 90% of those surveyed are very concerned about their privacy. 92% concerned about the loss of control over their personal information. This is huge. So privacy as the default setting flips everything on its head. It says to customers, you don't have to ask for privacy. We give it to you automatically. We are only permitted to use your personal information for the primary purpose of the data collection. Beyond that, we cannot use your personal information for anything else. And if down the road a secondary use arises where we would like to use your personal information, we have to come back to you and seek your positive consent again. Game changer. Companies that have been certified for privacy by design have told me that this creates trusted business relationships like no other. And there's such a trust deficit right now. So this is a huge game changer, win-win, And companies have told me it gives them a competitive advantage over the other guys. So pay attention. Privacy embedded into design, I think, speaks for itself. When privacy is part of your data architecture, your design, embedded into your code, baked in, you can't forget about it. It's always there. There can't be an oversight, oh, I forgot to ask them about privacy. It will always be present. You have to worry about it. I'm not going to spend much time on full functionality again, where I tell you to get rid of the data in zero-sum either-or model. I assure you, positive sum win-win will give you much better results. Let me talk about security for a moment. While the term privacy subsumes a much broader set of protections than security alone, in this day and age of daily hacking and phishing expeditions, if you don't have a solid foundation of security from end to end with full lifecycle protection, you're not going to have any privacy. So you have to start with security always and ensure that your data remains fully and totally secure. We're almost there. Visibility and transparency. You have to keep it open, and you have to have customers' data available to them. So make sure that customers can access their data that you have on them, your personal information. And the benefit to you as a company or a government department is that you will have much more accurate data. Companies who have been certified for privacy by design have come back to me and said, oh my God, we love that individuals access their own information because they alert us to mistakes. They say, oh no, that information you have, that's no longer the case. That was 2 years ago. Here's the more accurate data. So they increase the accuracy of our data and increase the quality, overall quality of the data. So they love it. You know, they said, look, we have data on thousands of customers. We don't know what's current and accurate and what's not. Customers have to tell us that, and they do when you give them the right access to their data. And respect for user privacy. We could have started with that as the first one. When you keep it user-centric, all of this falls into place. So take a look at this. To me, of course, this is motherhood. It may not be to you, but you can embed this into your design, into your systems, into your operations, and get much better results. In the next slide, please. Let me just tell you, operationalizing privacy by design, just in case you think that privacy by design maybe sounds good, but it's too hard to do. Au contraire, we did this paper. It consists of 22 papers that we did with all of the major tech companies. Think of any major tech company, Microsoft, Intel, HP, IBM, Oracle. I'm leaving out a number of them. But in all of these areas, we did it to show people, yes, all these companies are doing privacy by design in all of these technology areas. You can do it, and there's so much more you can do. Next slide, please. The Japanese Information Development Center sent me a letter near the end of my term as commissioner, and they said, privacy by design is one of the most important concepts by members of JIPDEC. They said, we have heard from Japan's private sector companies that we need to insist on the principle of positive sum, not zero sum, and become enlightened with privacy. So I love that because I thought, wow, if the Japanese, whose first language is not English, if they can embrace positive sum, not zero sum, then surely the rest of us can do that as well. In the next slide, please. And people say, well, okay, but what's it going to cost me? What is the cost of privacy by design? Obviously, there's a cost associated with it, but it is tiny. It is a fraction of the cost you incur when you have a data breach or privacy infraction. These days, they're no longer just lawsuits, they're class action lawsuits, outrageously expensive, millions of dollars. But the damage to your brand, the damage to your reputation may be so great that it's irreparable. There's nothing you can do. Loss of consumer confidence and trust that arises from these data breaches often cannot be remedied. So get smart and follow privacy by design. Now, the next slide, I talk about the GDPR. I know you're familiar with the General Data Protection Regulation, which came into effect in 2018, and it strengthens data protection and gives citizens far greater control over their personal information. But even more than that, on the next slide, what excited me so much was that it includes privacy by design and data protection by design. And privacy as the default, which I told you was the second most important of the 7 foundational principles, is also included in the GDPR. This is huge. So we've had great success with this. And in the next slide, there was an article written about this in 2015, and they said it's not too much of a stretch to say that if you implement privacy by design, you've mastered the GDPR. I would not go that far, I assure you, because there's much more to the GDPR than privacy by design. But what it says is that if you are doing privacy by design properly, you will have fulfilled most of the other sections of the GDPR. So that is the best part if you do privacy by design. In the next slide, please. This relates to Canada, but it's all about the Privacy Commissioner of Canada in 2017, before the GDPR came into effect. He said to the Canadian government, we need to strengthen our privacy laws and implement privacy by design. They've done that in Europe, and privacy by design is created by a Canadian, and Cavoukian, we should do that here. And in the next slide, please, we thought that the federal government was actually going to go in that direction because they produced a report called Towards Privacy by Design in order to upgrade our federal private sector legislation. Unfortunately, they didn't go that route, but we're not going to touch that. For now, it's too much of a nightmare. In the next slide, I'll tell you that I offer privacy by design certification to companies now. And in the next slide, you'll see that we partner with KPMG, and we've done so many certifications, and the companies love it because it says it builds trust in their companies and builds trusted business relationships. And now where there's such a trust deficit, that is invaluable. In the next slide, please. I also want to tell you about a course that I teach online on privacy by design, the Global Privacy Framework, and a new course I just started, in the next slide, please, called Trust by Design. We literally just started it this spring because trust is just lacking and it is eroding. And if you apply privacy by design, you can develop trust by design. Now, in the next slide, in the next remaining slides, I was going to talk about COVID-19 and the push for contact tracing, which is terrible. In the next slide, 300 experts, doctors, epidemiologists from 26 countries all around the world wrote an open letter last year to their governments, and they said, if we are not careful, we will erode all privacy and confidence. They warned that, they said, unless governments build contact tracing technology in a privacy protective manner, it will fail. And they said such apps can otherwise be repurposed to enable unwarranted discrimination and surveillance. And they said it's vital that we create a tool that enables large-scale data collection on the population, but we cannot do that. We cannot create these tools that build surveillance on the entire population now or ever. And in another letter, in the next slide, please, a second letter was written in the UK by 177 of their cybersecurity experts, warning the British government that their contact tracing app could be used to surveil people even after the coronavirus had ended. And they stopped that, thank God. And they've applied, as we did in Canada, in the next slide, please, the Apple-Google API. Apple and Google partnered together, which they rarely do, but they did it in order to develop a contact tracing app. Actually, they call it exposure notification, which is excellent. What it does, and we've applied that here in Ontario. I worked with the government to develop this and across Canada. You download the Apple Google exposure notification app, and you choose it. Nobody else has access to your information. It uses Bluetooth. No one can connect it with you, and it alerts you if you come within 2 meters or 6 feet of someone who has tested positive for COVID. And then you can decide what you want to do with that. Do you want to get tested? Do you want to go to your family doctor? The decision is entirely yours. You will be alerted. No one else has access to this personal information, only you. And that's why we need it, because we can't have personal data recorded. Otherwise, people aren't going to want to use these devices. You have to have that level of privacy, and I applaud Apple and Google for partnering together to develop this. Let me touch on one other thing, which is such a privacy nightmare: vaccine passports. In the next slide, please. This comment that, quote, it's setting up a national caste system and a spying apparatus unlike anything in our history. This is so true. Because you see, whenever you get a vaccine passport, there's going to be a notification of that. It will be recorded. There will be some evidence of the fact you've done that. And your location, your geolocation is tracked with that. So with the prevalence of vaccine passports being demanded all over the world, not just for travel, but if you go to a concert, if you go to a football game, if you go to whatever, your motions, your activity can be tracked and surveilled in a way that has never happened before. In the next slide, please. There's great fear that vaccine passports may become mandatory. And we don't believe governments should not be permitted to sidestep what's called the Charter of Rights and Liabilities for the creation of a discriminatory regime, simply by claiming that they're not responsible for how government passports are used, either in government or private sector. This is ridiculous. It is discriminatory in nature, the very nature of the vaccine passport, and we have to have some protections. In the next slide, please. The UK, the EU have faced privacy criticism for their COVID passport plans. Both British and European plans to develop coronavirus passports aim to let businesses reopen, but both privacy advocates and businesses are warning that they could be invasive and onerous, and that they're very concerned about this. I'll mention one thing that's being developed trying to respond to this. It's not enough, but it's something. In the next slide, please. ID 2020 has developed something called the Good Health Path Collaborative. And it's an effort to at least have a decentralized vaccine passport, such that no one can have central control over it. The tech would reside, the program would reside in your mobile device, for example. So when you go to the airport, you can choose to reveal to the gate attendant or whoever is going to on the plane that you have had a vaccine passport, if that's one of the requirements. And then that's it. They don't retain the data. They don't collect it. They just see that you have it. Next slide, please. The Good Health Pass is decentralized. It exerts user control, inclusivity, social responsibility, consent. All of these are baked into it. And the next slide, please. Privacy by design and privacy as the default are also included in it. So they're making every effort to have data minimizations, zero knowledge proofs, non-linkable transactions, totally decentralized. But I have to warn you, even with all of this in place, the fact that you're on a plane, which requires a vaccine passport, tells everyone you've had a vaccine passport. You've had the vaccine. Otherwise, you wouldn't have gotten on the plane. And those kind of inferences are going to be able to be made by more and more organizations all over the world. So I really fear the surveillance impact of vaccine passports. In the next slide, please. I just want to conclude by telling you that privacy and security risks are best managed proactively by embedding the principles of privacy by design. You want to prevent the privacy harms from arising, avoid the data breaches, much like a medical model of prevention. And if you focus on prevention, it's much easier and far more cost-effective to build in both privacy and security up front rather than after the fact. And this also reflects the most ethical treatment of personal data. I want you to abandon zero-sum thinking. That's so yesterday. Either or win-lose, get rid of that. embrace positive sum win-win results. We can do this. And one of my dear colleagues, Kyle Annenberg, he used to say to me, if people are smart, they'll lead with privacy by design. But a lot of them might just get privacy by chance, or worse, privacy by disaster when they have a data breach and the regulator comes knocking on the door. So let's avoid that. Try to build in privacy by design and reap the rewards. Now, the next slide, please. You can contact me if you have any questions. My website is there, my email. And if you happen to follow Twitter, I tweet every morning the latest privacy stories of the day, so you can find out what's going on. But my husband is a saint. So I'm so sorry that the volume, the sound on this wasn't good, but you can access my slides. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Anne. Yes, unfortunately, the audio wasn't amazing. That's, yeah, unfortunately, but like she said, we will share the slides with you.
Thank you.
And like she just showed, she showed her contact information. So if you really have a big question about privacy and design, make sure to reach out to Anne and then she can help you further. I'm gonna.
Thank you very much, Stefan. I've enjoyed this. Thank you very much.
Yes, I'm gonna. Since the gonna see, Anne, if you have time for a couple of questions, maybe.
Yes, I do. Yes.
Let me check. Okay. We have a question asking if you could give a practical example on how to achieve the win-win situation, which is the scenario to be pushed for.
Oh, there are so many. There was a advertising company here in Canada that wanted to make information available to customers on how they could benefit from joining a particular program. And they wanted to encourage customers from logging on to the program, but they also said your privacy will be completely protected. You don't have to worry about your identity being revealed. We'll just send you information relating to this program that you want to participate in. So they did this, and they had excellent results. They had so many customers log in. Their identity was completely protected, so no one feared anything in terms of their privacy being invaded, but they got to access the benefits of what this advertising was offering through this program. So total win-win.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Let me look if there's anything else. If not, yeah, I just want to say, like, yeah, if you have any questions, make sure to reach out to Anne. She will gladly help you further. So I'm just gonna show a couple of, oh, my computer is not working. So I'm just gonna talk a little bit about our privacy and data protection programs. So if you are interested in learning more about privacy in general, just because you just heard how important it is to have a proper privacy statement, we have the Accent Privacy and Data Protection Program, which consists of 3 models, which are based on what level you need. So essentials if you only need the basics, but we also have practitioner if you really need to know a lot. And also if you need to be a data protection officer, we have a career path, which combines some of our certifications, which includes privacy and data protection and information security management together. And by this, you can get the role of, basically you prepare yourself for the role of the data protection officer, which by GDPR is now mandatory for big companies even. So there's a big demand with all the privacy for this role. So if you are interested in this, then check out our website. As Anne already said before, all of the slides will be available to you. I will send them to you via email either tomorrow or the day after. And then you can click through all the links, you can go through all the slides. And once again, if you have any questions, send them to Anne. Our apologies for the audio issues, but yeah, the downside of online is that not only privacy is at stake, but also you can have issues like audio and etc. That's just unfortunate, but yeah, for now, yeah. Anne, I want to thank you very much for giving this presentation despite all the issues.
My pleasure. Thank you, Stefan.
Yes, and I want to thank everybody who attended and who stuck through us despite everything. So I wish you all a nice day, and yes, I hope you enjoyed.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.